What does it take to pastor a church in an unchurched metropolis? Passion, conviction, love, and most importantly, the right kind of support system. Hello, I'm your host, Jean-Paul Barun, president of Focus on the Family Canada. Welcome to the Thriving Family, a Focus on the Family Canada podcast. This is a space where family, faith, and culture intersect. You can enjoy the Thriving Family podcast ad-free without any interruptions, thanks to the generous donors who support our ministry. This season, we're talking about the very intersection of faith and culture, along with sound bites on entertainment, theology, biblical narratives, and contemporary issues. We're bringing intimate conversations with a wide variety of ministry leaders, researchers, entrepreneurs, and creators who have all generously taken the time to share their heart with you. If you like what you hear, be sure to rate the episode wherever you listen to the podcast. Remember to check out each episode's notes for related resources and for how to support the Thriving Family podcast. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jason Ballard. Jason is a pastor at the Way Church in Vancouver. He also serves as the executive director of the Pastorate and hosts the Pastorate podcast, engaging in conversations that strengthen the hearts of pastors and tell the story of the church in Canada. When he is not serving his church and working to inspire and equip pastors, you can find him at his home with his wife, Rachael, and 3 kids. Today's interview is facilitated by Len DenBraber, Chief Operating Officer at Focus on the Family Canada. I hope you are inspired by this robust conversation between Jason and Len.
Well, Jason, welcome to the Thriving Family podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I've been excited about this conversation for a little while. You and I have known each other for a bit, but I'm also excited to turn the tables because, of course, oftentimes you're asking the questions on your podcast.
Yeah, and that's a great place to be in because asking questions feels easier than answering them, at least to me. But it's good to be in the conversation with you, man. I love what you guys are doing. I think this is an important conversation and feel really honored to be part of it with you today.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, I love the way, love the pastorate. We're going to talk about both of those things today. And so, like I said, you and I have known each other for a little while. We first connected, I think, when you were thinking about planting a church in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit of that story. What inspired you to plant a church?
You know, I spent a good amount of time working with a wonderful ministry in Canada called Alpha. And Alpha gave me the privilege of seeing the diversity of the church across Canada. And I think oftentimes we find ourselves tucked into one particular place, city, town. And then if you're a Jesus follower, usually connected to one church, maybe you have some exposure to others, but your denomination or tradition. But my work with Alpha exposed me to the church across Canada, which is so beautiful and diverse in expression, God at work in all these different pockets. And my burden personally really began to grow. Like, I am one of those guys that believes that the local church is God's good plan for seeing Canada become a better place for everyone who lives in it. And the church has all of its, flaws and warts and bruises, but the church is God's plan and this, assembly of his people. And I remember in my undergraduate, I really wrestled with whether I was going to do ministry. I was actually studying business at SFU. And maybe in my second or third year, I found myself going, okay, I think I'm all in. I want to do ministry with my whole life. I think everyone is a full-time minister, but in the sense of like, this is going to be the job. This is what I'm going to give my working hours to every day, building local church. And as I began to see kind of growing needs and challenges facing the church in Canada, my heart began to be stirred about the possibility of working with some friends to lead a church that actually had a burden for the church in Canada, that a local church could be a hub for building resources that respond to questions of our day and raising up ministers. And the first kind of idea wasn't a church plant necessarily, but as me and some friends began to dream about how we might work together, it became clear to us that maybe a church plant was part of that story. And the discernment that went into that was slow. It was lots of conversations. It was lots of prayer. It was God showing up
Yeah.
in creative ways, prophetic words, confirmation. But eventually we kind of got to the point, me and my friends Jer and Chris, that were like, and they were each meaningfully working at local churches. Chris was leading a church in Coquitlam. Jeremy was meaningfully involved with a church called Christian Life Assembly, which I was at in Langley. And we're like, I think we're doing this. I think we're going to leave our jobs. We're going to move our families to the city, and we're going to plant a new expression. And one of the questions we often got was, two questions. Like, first, why a church plant? And there's so many ways to answer that question. We need church planting. It is like through research and through experience. Again and again and again, church plants are shown to be one of the most effective ways to reach people far from God, to engage people in mission, and to revitalize the church ecology in a particular city. So church planting is a necessary part of the broader ecology of the church. But even if you just take like a very practical take, like population growth in a city like Vancouver, and Canada is a growing country by population, and cities are growing, and to best serve and reach people who are newcomers to the city or the growing population of the city, church planting is a really effective strategy to continue to make space for people to be discipled, to find meaningful community. But the most honest answer was a deep sense from God that we were being led into this adventure. But the other question that we were asked is, what's going to be different about the way? And my answer was often, I hope not much. Like, there's a wonderful expression of the church in Vancouver. And the church in Vancouver for a long time has been pointing people to Jesus, proclaiming the gospel, gathering people to worship, marrying people, burying people, baptizing people. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We want to join in this great tradition and find ourselves in harmony with the work of the church. And on our best days, we primarily identify as part of a much bigger kingdom story than the thing we're doing, and believe that God wanted us to lead a new expression of a local church, to be a complement and harmony with the existing churches in the city.
Right. Because I know a little bit of your story, there's so many different ways I want to go with this, but I do want to just land on this idea of planting a church in Vancouver. So I'm assuming most of our audience is Canadian. Many people will be familiar with the landscape of Canada. But I did a bit of research in preparation for this, and it confirmed what I thought I already knew. And that's that Vancouver has one of the lowest rates of evangelical church attendance in the country. So estimates are somewhere between 1.5% and 4.5% of the population of the city will find themselves in a church service at least once a month. And I feel like 4.5% is actually maybe generous. And I know from my own work in church planting in the past, Vancouver's kind of known as a place where church planters often try and fail. So let me ask you the question. Why not go somewhere where, the churches are popping up everywhere and it appears to be comparatively easy? Like, why Vancouver?
I think two answers. One is for the very reason you just said, is that it is a hard city. And there are many people who don't know Jesus personally or find themselves in a life-giving community of Jesus followers. And so I think there's a real part of us that wanted to be part of those stats changing. And I think that would make a difference in the city. And I guess the other answer to the question is, we really sense that God was asking us to go to the heart of a city like Vancouver and make sense of how to make disciples here. That might be able to be a resource to the church as we think it through here. Maybe that helps address some of the questions. One of the, you think about the questions and the cultural challenges you face here, they're really not that different than we're faced across Canada. But sometimes the cities are a little bit out in front on the cultural questions. They're experiencing them more viscerally quicker. Not that it's different issues, but it's just experienced sometimes a bit more intensely quicker. And so there's a real sense of like, well, let's go take a swing at it here in the city. Maybe a third answer is, I love Vancouver. I have friends who pastor in the south, like south in the south of America, United
Mm,
States of
mhm.
America, where like percentage of evangelical church attendance would be way higher, like 20, 30, 40%, like massive.
Yeah.
And I find myself honestly going, I wouldn't know how to lead a church there. I don't,
Mm,
but I feel like I was made to pastor in a city like Vancouver. And
mhm,
I love this city. I'm not enamored by it. I'm not infatuated with it. I see its challenges and the quirks in the worldview collectively. But I love this city and I feel called here.
mhm,
And I think I think each one of us as followers of Jesus get to live with a sense of purpose and place. That I'm
mhm.
here for a reason. And I think it was Keith Green one time was doing a concert and he was like, how many people here are called to the city you're in or the place you're in? I might be
Mhm.
quoting this wrong. It might just be, lore. But he said something like that. And then he said, everyone who didn't raise your hand, pack your bags.
Mm,
And what was I think what he was saying is all of us are meant to live with a sense of call to place. And
yeah.
I know that sometimes a sense of call to place is just acknowledging God put me here. This is where I'm going to be mom. This is where I'm going to be dad. This is where I'm going to be
Mhm,
neighbor.
mhm,
This is where I'm
mhm,
going to be. But even then, if there wasn't like a dream and a vision that said, go to this place, I think we can wake up each morning going, well, unless God's called me somewhere else, he has me here for a purpose. And that's
mhm,
meant to galvanize a courage in our heart that there's grace in the Holy Spirit for us to be a minister of Jesus' kingdom wherever
mm,
we're found. And so though when you hear those stats and there's lots that we could say about how challenging it is here, I think there is a deep sense of, well, this is where the Lord has me.
mhm,
And if
mhm.
that's true, then I can be courageous and we can believe for signs of the kingdom to show up around us. And that's been
Mhm.
our experience. Like, it's just been a stunning journey, Len. Like, on the macro, the church experiencing growth and vitality and impact, but even on the micro local levels, like on our own street that we're on right now, the proximity to neighbors, most of which have no connection to church, and
Mm,
seeing all the ways that God opens just amazing doors. And what I kind of lament from seasons when I didn't live with this kind of intentionality of place is that you miss the opportunities to see ways that we're invited in all around us. Like, I think
mhm.
each one of us each day can wake up and go, okay, the Lord has me here. What are you up to around me? And when you start looking at the
Right.
world that way, you see signs of the kingdom everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me sort of jump off that because we could talk a lot about the church itself, which is amazing. We could talk a lot about your ministry specifically, but this is the Thriving Family podcast. So I want
Yeah.
to land on a question around family. So if I understand correctly, you picked everybody up out of Langley, moved them
Yeah.
from suburban, moved them into urban Vancouver. Uh, did that have any effect, positive or negative, like on your marriage? How did your
Mm.
kids respond? Did they have the same sense of calling, or were they kind of like, having a tough time with that? Tell me about the family dynamic
Mm.
in this.
Thanks for that question. I think about this a lot.
Hmm.
So Rach and I, my wife, we've been married for 16 years. We really discern this together. I didn't spring it on her. And we've been talking about it for years. And what was interesting is I think, and I don't want to speak too much for Rach, but I think she would say that she'd only lived in Langley and been at one church her whole entire life. And so I think
Hmm.
for her, it felt like a real mystery. What's this going to be? And there was some nerves around that.
Yeah.
But we both found ourselves having a yes to the Lord to move together. So we were unified in that. And that's a powerful thing. When mom and dad are unified
Hmm.
around a step, you can weather some fierce storms. Um, and so we found ourselves unified in that. And then by God's grace, like, we really fell in love together in the place that we found ourselves. The timing was very weird because just a few months after we landed in the city, the pandemic restrictions
Yeah.
kicked in. And that's something we can talk more about. But for my kids, it did cost them a lot. They were quite young when we first moved. So our oldest,
Hmm.
Hudson, would have been maybe 7 at the time,
Hmm.
6 or 7, and then younger from there, like 5 and 3. So Millie, she wasn't weighing in too much on the dialogue about it. But they knew we were going with a sense of calling, that we felt like
Yeah.
God had us here. And so that raised some really meaningful questions. I think the hardest part was we had great friendships with other families with similar values, with kids the same age as ours or close to in friendship. And that's been really hard to find in the city. You know, a lot of families, once you get a certain number of kids or to a certain age, they move to the suburbs. And that makes a ton of sense because the cost of living, access to programs and schools, all these things. And so I think one of the hardest things has been seeing them not have the same flourishing friendships that were shared with other families. And we've worked hard to try to cultivate that, but we've also had to cultivate deeper bonds within our home. And the other thing is the exposure to, like, you walk down, we're close to Commercial Drive, you walk down that street, and what things are on poles and what signs are on buildings. They're brutal. It's hypersexual. It's to even say it doesn't map over the values of the kingdom of God, feel like it doesn't even, it's like, it is so perverse, and they're exposed to all of this. And I find myself often praying, like, Lord, give us wisdom to help guide our kids through what they're being exposed to. And I pray that the shrapnel of saying yes to the call that we sense God has for us wouldn't cost our kids knowing and loving Jesus and growing in the healthiest sense of the way you can grow as a whole child. But the prayer continues to also go, God, I pray that the very thing that we might be afraid would hurt their formation might be the very thing that you use to form in them a deep love for you, a deep bond with their family, and a deep love for the local church. So we made big decisions, like we're homeschooling our kids in the city. I don't know if that's a controversial thing. And we have radically reorganized the way we operate as a household, even like down to building weekly rhythms with neighbors and friends and patterns of visiting family, where we go, how do we create an ecosystem around our children, even in a city like this, that will allow them to flourish? And you don't need to homeschool to do that. There's lots of ways to do that, but it does require intentionality. And again, really fortunate that that's something that when Rach and I spend time together, we wonder about, scheme about, dream about, okay, how do we do this? How do we parent well? And we lean on the resources of organizations like Focus on the Family and others to learn from others and pull things in. And I would hate to make it sound more glamorous than it is, but we're kind of trying to take it seriously that we're the first disciple makers in their lives.
Yeah.
And we're their primary community of formation, their primary bonds. And so it's demanded more of me and more of Rach, but I think we're really, really glad to say yes to that. But yeah, it's been costly. The hardest parts is like when they feel lonely, and you know, as they get older, they can articulate that, you know, longing for some of those deeper friendships. And you know, in my heart, I'm like, Lord, like, please protect these kids, and please, like, can you provide deep friendships and all those sorts of things. So it's not without a cost to the family, for sure. But it's also not without its blessings. You know, this has made us a tighter family unit. Rachael, my wife, she's got a mentor that she spends time with. And this wonderful older lady that invests in Rach, does a lot of prayer ministry, gave her this word about our home, our last home. And she said, hey, Rach, I wonder if sometimes you feel like, because we had a much bigger space. It wasn't big, but comparatively is a bigger space in the suburbs. And she said, I know that you miss having that and having those safe places for your kids to play and all that. But she gave this word, and I don't know if I'm summarizing it exactly, but essentially the heart of it was, God is intentionally bringing you guys into a closer space. And actually that kind of nourishing closer space is what the children need. Now, whether that was literally about the home or not, but for us, that became actually a bit of a North Star for a season of like, hey, this thing that we felt like was a loss of more space and more freedom for the kids has forced us in towards one another. And it's possible that's the very thing that God most wants for these kids in these years. And so it's been a sweet journey. It's forced us into humility. I pray a lot more for my kids because I just walk the streets and see what they're exposed to, and it turns my
Yeah.
heart to prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I actually want to dig just a little deeper, because one of the things I love about you, Jason, is that you're really thoughtful about life, work, ministry. It feels like every time I hear you share something, I'm like, man, I wish I had half as many thoughts as that guy does. So, um, families move all the time. Sometimes, they're ministry families and they move. Other times it's for work. Other times it's, pure economics, moving
Yeah.
from one part of the city, or I should say the country, to another because, of affordability and so on. What would you say to parents who are thinking about a move, again, a significant geographical move where, you're plucking your kids from what they know into something else, or even in terms of your marriage? How can you disciple your kids through that change?
It's a cool question. I think each stage and age would be so unique, a teenager who's leaving a friend group, that social cost is so much harder. I think whether it's 12 or 13, in those preteen window, there is a really important differentiation that happens in a child's mind and the way they relate, where the primary social bonds move from their family to a broader community. And that's actually a really important part of development. And I think whether it's youth volunteers or parents or caregivers, it's important to observe that's actually a normal part of maturing. But as a result of that, a child who's on the other side of that season, or in the season of differentiating socially from their family to finding their identity in a broader community of friends, or that could be a church community or a sports team, the cost is higher. So I think that journey is really important. I think lots of dialogue and conversation. I would say one of the things that's been hardest for me is wanting to sell them on how their life is better here than there. So give you an example. Hudson says to me, "Dad, I really miss the friends I had in Langley." And in that moment, I'm tempted to sort of reframe the scenario. Yeah, but look what we have. Like, you're part of this sports team here, and we have this park across the street. And essentially what's happening there is I am uncomfortable with his pain, and I'm trying to just minimize the pain instead of holding space for that. And I think that the invitation for parents are to lovingly lead. I think we have to lead. Our kids might not understand that dad or mom needs to say yes to this new job, or there's economic realities. Like, sometimes children just won't understand. And so you lead courageously. You say, "Mom and Dad have thought about this. We've discerned this, and we understand that this is hard." And then to make room, and I think this is across the board with parenting, to be okay. Like, when my kids scrape their knee, the temptation is always distract, give them a sucker. And sometimes that's a great strategy. But as they mature, their life provides pain that a sucker or a distraction can't really medicate and shouldn't. And what the opportunity, I think, is to acknowledge that following Jesus and life on planet Earth includes risk. It includes pain. It includes sacrifice. Sometimes we know why we're sacrificing. It's worth it. And other times we don't understand that this side of the new heavens, the new earth, there's brokenness and pain. And I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. And I'm here for it. And so I think the main thing is, because like what we all know is that humans are incredibly resilient, especially children, like their ability, their bodies, their brains to adapt. But if we circumvent the process and try to not let children enter into that feeling of loss, and then be able, because when we experience loss and we grieve it well, we don't become bitter, we don't become closed off, we can become more beautiful. And that's the journey our kids are on. And so even like, it's funny, I've been showing my kids even parts of the Psalms that give permission to complain to God.
Right.
And I'll often say, can you believe it, that God is so secure in himself that I was just chatting with Hudson this morning, and he's going through some stuff, not connected to the move, but other stuff. And he asked about prayer. And essentially he's like, why do it seems like so many of my prayers don't work? And we had a good chat about it, but ultimately I was like, you know what? It's not uncommon for me to say to God, I don't know why it feels like you're not listening.
Yeah.
And trying to invite him into that kind of experience. And everything inside of me wants to button up a theology or a case where it's like, oh, God's got better. He's got better in
Yeah.
store. Just hold on. And I believe
Yeah.
that. I think he does
Yeah.
have better.
Yeah.
But the spirituality of the Bible invites us to bear our honest emotions before God and not ignore them. And so I think one of the best things parents can do is model a faith that has room for big questions of uncertainty, has rooms for feeling disappointed even in what God is doing. And I think what that allows for is a more robust experience in your family's relationship, where there's room for pain, discomfort, but also ultimately in their walk with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just reflecting on doing something similar with my kids where we moved them from, essentially the only city that they had known to another community altogether. And they were 13, 11, and 8. And
Okay.
I certainly wasn't as thoughtful as you've been. I kind of like, hey, everybody, we're moving. And I didn't include them much in the conversation, but I think what we did do was we did invite them into the journey, the adventure, the thing that we were pursuing. And it was sort of like, okay, like Dad's leading the charge here, but we're doing this as a family.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of kicking and screaming along the way, to be fair, but all three of them rose to the occasion, and they were like, okay, well then let's do this as a family. And that was a helpful piece for us as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think the family unit is really powerful.
Yeah.
What's funny is like, I think that we underestimate how much of that home security can be cultivated in the family relational unit, so that wherever you find yourself and whatever circumstance you find out, there can be this real safe family unit where children can belong, feel delighted in, have a measure of both familial connection, but also friendship with their siblings and others.
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of intentionality, but I feel like sometimes we underestimate just the power of a vibrant, connected family. And it takes a lot of commitment on the part of mom and dad to show up with energy and to show up with creativity to say, okay, if we're asking our kids to make this move or whatever it might be, what do we need to say yes to so that our home can be a safe place while there's all this change happening around them? And I don't think we got it right even half the days, but maybe the other half of the days, we find ourselves meeting it with some measure of intentionality.
Yeah.
And but it's not without a cost. And I definitely tell them that we're like, because it comes up, like they miss parts of home before. And it's like, we're here because God's called us to these people. And we really believe that we're here to be ambassadors of Jesus and make it a better place for others to live because we're here. And I don't think they always get that, but I do think it's part of a good faith formation, understand that we live with the sense of God being with us wherever we go and God being at work through us wherever we find ourselves. And I hope that they catch that and they carry that into whatever seasons are ahead for them.
Yeah, I would say that the good news too is that the Holy Spirit is at work and God is gracious and merciful and helps our children in ways that we can't as much as we'd like to as well. And so you can't entirely rely on that in the sense of like, well, God's got it, we'll just make our own decisions. But thankfully, our Heavenly Father cares about our kids even more than we do. And wants to carry them through that. And thank God for his help there. I want to switch gears just a little bit because we've talked a little bit about your ministry in Vancouver and your call to the city and the work that you're doing there. But for those who don't know, you've got some other things on the go as well. So you're also the executive director of the Pastorate.
Yeah,
And so tell us about the Pastorate, what it is, what it does.
sure. So the pastorate exists to strengthen pastors to be faithful and fruitful ministers of God in his church. And our big conviction is that if we want to see Canada become a better place for everyone, and we need to see healthy churches in every nook and cranny of this country, every town, village, city needs healthy churches. And if we want to see healthy churches, one of the things that we need is healthy, vibrant, called pastors, men and women who have said yes to shepherd the church. And in Canada right now, we have a challenge around this. We have a massive shortage of called, equipped, and trained pastors. We also have high burnout rates and high signs of loneliness and unhealth and isolation and disconnection and despair in pastors. And so the pastor has really started to create, through a couple different strategies, essentially spaces where pastors could find community with one another, find training and support so that they can grow in their craft as a pastor, but also develop in a deep life in God and that emotional health and character formation that will allow them to go the distance with joy and integrity, believing that one of the best things we can do to see communities and churches transformed is invest in pastors. So we do this in all kinds of ways. The best way to summarize what we're about is we're for Canada, we're for the church, and we're for pastors. And if a pastor thought about the pastorate and just thought, those people are for me, and because of their voice, I feel like what I do matters more, then we're doing our job. And we also feel like we're meant to sort of tell the Canadian church story. We're intentionally working across denominations, across regions, and we work in harmony with denominations, in harmony with different networks and groups, but essentially trying to bring exposure to wonderful signs of God at work through the local church all over the country. And so it's really, really fun. I feel like I'm a little bit of like a broker of all these beautiful stories of the local church across Canada.
Yeah.
And so many men and women that are serving faithfully and longing to do it with others. Like one thing that's really true of this generation of pastors is there's this sense of like, I want to do it with others. I want to, I don't want to just stick to my own or my own, like this. I want to have friendships with other pastors in the city. I want to know people across Canada, and I want to run this race with others. And so in some ways, we're kind of building some of that informal connective tissue to make that possible.
Yeah. We love the pastorate at Focus on the Family. In fact, we're in a official partnership with the pastorate just because of the work that you're doing with pastors is so amazing, and that connectivity and the relational importance that's there. And your podcast, The Pastorate, I think we'll link it to the show notes, hopefully, is also a must listen. It's regularly on my list too.
That's encouraging.
So you're in my ears a lot of days as I'm driving into work. So thank you for your personal investment in my life, because it's just been a joy to listen to what you're doing there. You mentioned about pastors just wanting to do ministry with others. I mean, you've modeled that with the way. Again, you mentioned it earlier, but if people didn't catch it, you planted that church not alone, not as a solo church planter, but with others, and of course two others and a whole team around you. So let me ask you, in terms of your connection with pastors, what would you say is one of the greatest challenges that they face as they endeavor to lead churches and the ministries that God has called them to?
I'd say isolation is one of them. And overwhelm is another. And maybe exhaustion, which is connected. Isolation, I think that the reality is, like you experienced this, Len, every adult listening, as you get older, it's harder and harder to have deep, knowing friendships.
Yeah.
When you're in high school or elementary school, you find someone in your class on your soccer team, and life isn't that complicated. So you're around each other. You spend time, and for the most part, you got a good kind of tapestry of
Mm-hmm.
friendships. But as you get
Mm-hmm.
older, it just gets harder and harder. People move, life gets busy. There's sometimes fractures in the relationship, and you might not have the tools or commitment to resolve it. All of that's true, but there's an extra dynamic on it for pastors, which is the idea of dual relationships, where often for a pastor, the people in their closest community are in their church, are
Mm-hmm.
on their staff, are volunteering, are on their board.
Mm-hmm.
And some of this is just in the mind of the pastor. It's not there. It doesn't need to be a problem, but it is. But some of it's very real, where people come with expectations. You get burned a few times. You find yourself consciously or subconsciously just isolating a little bit. And then also there's pressure to be a certain way, to have answers. And I know that pastors don't need to live with that pressure. No one's asking them to be perfect, but sometimes that you feel that. And so as a result, isolation is very common. I think pastors might be some of the loneliest people. And that's a huge liability, because when we are made to be people in community, and we experience God's grace often through the experience of a loving friend. When we're struggling, we need someone to lift our arms and lift us up. And it only has to happen a few times where you're in the midst of struggle, but instead of reaching out to a loving friend, you just tell yourself to tough it out or don't worry about it. And those things over time can calcify. So this idea of some isolations, and it's not just loneliness, it really can be an isolation that is a deeper kind of loneliness, of not being understood or seen. But there's also this idea of overwhelm, where the task of pastoring now more than ever just feels so incredibly challenging, because there's the shepherding responsibilities, which include preaching and pastoral care and leading prayer and all those things. Then there's the organizational responsibilities. And, we live in a country where I think this is good. We have like CRA laws and BC Societies Act, and you need to lead your organization. There's HR laws. But now there's the digital dynamics, where we need to be able to work in the digital space, not just in personal space. People's lives are complicated. So it's organizationally complicated. It's ethically complicated. It's a very, very difficult job. And then on top of that, and this was really new in the pandemic, is all of a sudden pastors needed to become cultural commentators on any and every issue. And essentially, I think lots of pastors feel like, I'm being asked to be good at a million things, and I'm just a human. And I don't have the answers to every question. I don't have every skill in the book. This is one of the reasons why I think pastoring in the context of teams is important. You got complementary gifts. You're not alone in it. But I think that feeling of overwhelm is a very real has a real effect on pastors. And so and we could go on to talk about other things. I think that it's a discouraging job. You're very proximate to a lot of pain, a lot of people hurting. You can feel like the job's never complete. And I think that as a result, you have a lot of pastors that are prone to a couple things. They could be prone to burnout, which we've seen that happen lots before, or checking out, kind of like a numbing out a little bit, going like, hey, I'm engaged, but I'm not fully engaged. Or worst case scenario, some sort of like blowout, where it's like there's some sort of self-sabotage or circumstances that derail the life and destabilize the life of the pastor to such a degree that they no longer can serve in the way they do. And even if none of that manifests to the place where they find themselves not serving the local church, if a pastor is not healthy, it's just how it works in households. If mom and dad aren't healthy, the household's not healthy. In business, if the people who operate the business aren't healthy, it just trickles down. The same is true in a local church. Like, as it goes with the pastor, so it often goes with the community. And so anytime we can human size the responsibility of a pastor, to acknowledge that they're called by God, they're uniquely graced by God, but they're humans. They can't answer every call. They can't respond to every question with infinite nuance and certainty, and they can't do all the things. Likely if there's 4 or 5 key responsibilities to a pastor, you're probably naturally good at just 2 of them. And so it's those are real challenges. And I think that the solution, not that there's a simple solution, is for communities to rally around the pastor and celebrate their unique gifting and calling, and embrace that they can't be all the things all the time, But then also for pastors to be surrounded by community of people who understand what it's like. And this is why we try to gather pastors together so much. You were
Hmm.
with us in Winnipeg and Edmonton, where we just do these
Yeah.
pastors meetups. And there's just something special being in a room with other pastors who go, we get it. We get what it's
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And then to say, but what an amazing job we have. Like, even as I'm saying this stuff, I'd hate for anyone
Hmm.
to think that I'm just a complainer. What a honor it is to be a pastor. I can't believe what I get to do. Like, I have a front row seat to God at work in a living community at work in a city like this. I get to see signs and wonders every single week. It's very, very special. We often say it's a very holy calling, but it's a hard calling. It's very difficult. And I think that's true of a lot of other vocations as well. This is just the one that I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah. I just love your heart for pastors. And I love that you, along with the pastorate, have created a framework to create, health, or at least help to foster health in pastors across the nation. And of course, we focused as something similar with the Careth Ministry Leader Retreats. And again, that's why that partnership works, is because we have a similar heart.
Yeah.
And so we can sort of talk about this from top down. This is what we see with pastors, but I'd love to know for a moment, like, what do you do to stay spiritually and relationally whole? Like let's just sort of let the rubber meet the road.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about what functions in your life. Just to keep on the right track.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. The relationships that I keep are really important. My primary relationships with Rach, my wife, and my kids, close friends, and choosing to foster those relationships of prime importance. That I need a constellation of relationships. It can't just be one. It can't just be my wife. It can't just be one counselor. I need a constellation of friends that I can play with, mentors that I can learn from, brothers that I can bear my pain with, a spouse that I can journey through life intimately with. And you need that constellation of relationships. The challenge, though, is in the midst of a busy world, and is showing up for those relationships and showing up with my whole person. So it's all fine and good to show up for those relationships, but if I'm hurting and none of them know, then it's very difficult for them to be part of God's healing work towards that pain. And what I've found, and I wonder if people who are listening resonate, is when you're hurting, it can be the hardest time to let people in because you're exhausted. When you're discouraged, and sometimes you don't want to complain, or you don't want to burden people. So for me, it's showing up for relationships even when I don't feel like it. So that's a big piece of the puzzle. Another piece of the puzzle is being honest with myself, like honest with my humanity, and honest with, like, for example, if I'm honest, I want everyone in my church to like me.
Yeah.
And so honesty sounds like me going, God, I know you've called me to lead with courage, but I don't want to lead right now because I want everyone to like me. And I feel like if I make a decision, and then inevitably when you lead and somebody's unhappy or discouraged, or could be because of no fault on my part or because I make mistakes as a human, to go, God, like, I've heard some leaders say, and maybe it's true for them, it's just not true for me. Like, they'll say things like, I don't care what people think. Or, yeah, that doesn't affect me. I think for me, I have to be honest, it does affect me. I do care. Those criticisms do hurt. And so just being honest with myself, honest that I'm human, that I have imperfect desires to be liked. And it impacts me when people are critical or disappointed, but then also honest with my limitations. Like, I started seeing this early on in my ministry life, where I would get to the end of a work day, and let's say my plan was to go home at 5:30 to be with Rach and the kids, but somebody on my staff who I like, or somebody in the church was like, hey, do you got time for a quick call? And I would be like, no problem. Because I want to be available. I'm a pastor in a place. And so, yeah, no problem. Quick call. Now it's 6 p.m. Oh, there's these emails that came in, quickly do it. And before I knew
Hmm.
it, I was showing up for maybe my church or my responsibilities, but it was at the expense of the people closest to me.
Yeah.
And so now they're getting me not home at 5:30, at 7. And it's okay for that to happen once every now and then. But like when that's happening over and over again, I realized that my people pleasing was costing my family. And the real root of it was I didn't want to let anyone down at
Hmm.
church.
Hmm.
I wanted to be available to everyone. And that was me not being honest about my humanity. And so the hardest thing for me, but I try to do it as like a spiritual discipline, is sometimes to say, I really care. I hear you. I'm not available to connect right
Hmm.
now. And you feel the disappointment on the other side. You feel
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and I want to, but to be honest with that. And so honesty about my humanity, honesty about my weakness, honesty before others, God and self is a huge part of it. And then I've
Hmm.
got like a pretty basic bread and butter kind of rule of life, that shapes um, time in the word, time in prayer.
Hmm.
Um, I meet with somebody once a week and confess sin and hear him speak God's forgiveness back to me. I'm part of a group of pastors that meet on a regular basis and pray for one another. I'm part of a community in our neighborhood that tries to gather um, for meals together. And it's a lot of basic stuff, fasting,
Hmm.
prayer.
Hmm.
And if you look at my track record, I'm not getting 10 for 10 on all of it. But over the course of years, there's a really sort of simple, basic um, baseline tapestry of practices
Hmm.
that we've inherited from our beautiful church tradition. And I find that there's seasons when those things feel effortless, and there's seasons where it feels like discipline.
Hmm.
But the gift of those simple practices over time is they do ground you, they limit you, they put you in positions of honesty before God and self and others. And so if you were to look at my life, the things that are kind of making all of this possible, it's nothing really spectacular. It's really basic Christian disciplines, but trying to meet them with a courageous authenticity,
Mm.
courageously
That's
honest with self and God and others.
Yeah, that's so amazing. That's so great. I have to sort of just land on a practical question though.
Yeah, go for it. I
And
love
maybe
going into the
people,
details. Yeah, yeah.
well, maybe people who are listening to this are asking the same question is um where do you find all the time for that? I mean, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a pastor, you lead the pastorate. Um like how do you carve time for
Mm,
family, for friends, for spiritual disciplines, for work, for I know you are also committed to your physical health, so exercise. Um do you
yeah.
have more time than the rest of us? How does that work?
No, and you know what? I'm one of those weird dudes. Like, when you meet people that are like, yeah, I'm good on 6 hours of sleep. I'm not that person. Like
Mm,
I need lots of sleep. Like I'm not a happy camper if I have too many nights of not good sleep. I think
yeah.
a couple things. One is every season is different. And I think we can never compare our capacity to others.
Mm, mhm,
So I have the way Rach and I negotiate the responsibilities in our life towards our kids, her, and that changes season to season. But like that's kind of the first sort of piece of the puzzle is like, are we on the same page working towards the same goal together? Um, but I think that sometimes, when my kids were 2 and 3 years old, my energy for certain things was a lot less because I was sleeping
mhm.
less and there was a
Yeah.
physical energy there. And then now as the kids get older, it has more of an emotional energy. So then I find that my emotional tank. And so I think every season's different, every person's different, and everyone's circumstances are different. So we should never compare, capacity, just like we should never compare grief or pain. Like pain is pain,
Mm,
grief is grief. And we don't need to compare whose is worse or better. Um, but I think that like one thing I do is, and I'll do this in 2 weeks, is I go away once a year with one dear friend and we write our eulogy
mm,
and we look back on the year and we look ahead at the year ahead, and most of it's alone time, but then we have over meals, we share some of our thinking. And I try to put a little bit of design effort into saying, what are my priorities? What are the patterns I want to keep? And then part of my personality is that I like a lot of tabs open. That's how God made me. I'm at my best when there's multiple tabs open on the screen. That's not everybody. But on top of that, by God's grace, I work with teams that are willing to lead in my weaknesses. And so I'm able to be involved with a lot of things meaningfully, but it's only because of a bit of my wiring, but also the teams that I'm working with. And so, and when those teams are breaking down, then the whole scaffolding falls apart. But when the relationships are good, and then when I'm present to God and self and others, that's my big responsibility. I need to show up in the day, present to God, present to my own humanity and others. But I know it can sound like a lot of things going on, but if you were to follow me for a week, I think it would look like, for some people, too much context switching, yes, but like a lot of really basic things, like I try to move slow in the morning. I have a friend that I walk with or exercise with. And so then all of a sudden that friendship is being built and I'm stacking it. And some of my closest friends are people I'm doing ministry with. But I think that one other thing I was going to say is that a friend of ours in common called Derek Hamry was answering a question like this we have a thing called the Way College, and I'm teaching our third years on church administration. And so these are people who want to be in ministry in the third year of the program. And somebody asked, how do you do all the things you do as a pastor? And he gave this really helpful analogy. He said, when you first start working out, you can lift the bar and a little bit of weight. And it's incredibly difficult. But then over time, you put more and more weight on, more and more weight on. And he says the same is true in leadership and in ministry. And I think with family and parenting is if you overextend, you'll hurt yourself and they'll stop the growth. But if you grow, you can carry more. And I think how you carry weight matters a lot about how much weight you can carry, how you relate to things. And I think that over time, I've been doing ministry for over 20 years now, which is funny to say, but I started really young. And you start to learn, what am I good at? What can I say yes to with joy? What really empties my tank? What am I not good at and need help? And I think over time you can take on more. I've also found that when you align your life around a clear set of values and purpose, you can do more. And so everything in my life is value aligned. It's around hospitality. It's around community. It's centered on, to the best of my abilities, there's value alignment, but then also there's missional alignment. Every project I'm working on is about strengthening pastors and strengthening the local church. And so when there's harmony across those things, you can sometimes do more because there's this compatibility that brings synergy. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the reflections for me.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I immediately resonate with what you're saying about not everybody has the same capacity, and also the season is different.
Yes.
And I might add, and I think you said it as well, but I might add that we can't take somebody else's template and lay it on top of our lives. I think sometimes this is the hard work that we personally need to do to figure some of this stuff out. And it's not easy, and it can take time, and it feels like a lot of start and stop. But when you begin to find that rhythm that works for you according to how God has uniquely designed you and what he's called you to do, whether it's in ministry, the marketplace, or the home, or whatever else it is, that's where we begin to really feel like we're walking in step with God. And so I love your answer.
I think that's why I mentioned the time I go away each year. Because most of life just happens to us, and we can find ourselves. I think this is really important with patterns of the household. We can find ourselves in rhythms around tech and busyness and meals and all this stuff, and be like, this isn't the household. This isn't the way we want it. But you can feel kind of very much like a victim to all of the circumstances and busyness and demands. And while it's not easy to adjust, I do think that to step out of the mix for a moment, whether it's in your quiet time in the morning, or it's a long walk or a couple days away, whatever you can do, it's going to be different, is to look back at your life and to say, how might I ask the courageous question of what is the life I feel God is calling me to live, or what's the life I want to live? And what might I do to organize my life towards that outcome? And I'm not talking about productivity, because productivity assumes that doing more is the goal. Sometimes the goal is not productivity. It's actually to do less and to not be as productive, but to be more present. But that you have to design towards that. And so it's like, I think that it takes stepping out of the noise and flurry of activity and just say, what kind of life do I want to live? And some of the patterns I'm putting in my life right now are actually patterns that necessitate no's. You know, and so I grew up in a family that did a family night on Fridays. And I never noticed this as a kid. But looking back, I wonder how many times my parents said no to things on Fridays so they could say yes to that. For me, it just felt like this is what we do on Fridays. But that's intentionality from mom and dad to say, what kind of household do we want to live? And then what kind of patterns in this season can we put on our family that will create the kind of connection they're after? And I think whether it's personal disciplines that are around spirituality, like prayer and scripture or fasting, or corporate disciplines around community, or even disciplines around fitness or education, to be honest with your limitations, but to say, hey, how do I organize a simple pattern for my life that reflects the values that I have? And it's very hard to do. And I find that it often happens in baby steps. But if you do that year on year on year, over time it refines a little bit. And you kind of go, oh, I have kind of an operating pattern for my life that reflects my values. And so I'm gearing up to go away this year. And I already have a little notebook with some reflections that are like, oh, I said yes to too many traveling engagements this year. And so I'm asking the question, what can I put in place for next year that means that I won't find myself in the same place? Or there's certain disciplines that I've kind of deprioritized. And I'm going to try to ask myself the question, how do I lift those up? And it's always a very humbling exercise. And I never actually implement as much of it as I hope I would. But some of it always sticks a little bit. And so year on year, you find yourself going, oh, yeah, like I am living with intentionality. And I couldn't say that about my life 10 years ago. But I feel grateful to be able to go, yeah, I think I'm meeting my days and weeks with a bit more intentionality. I'm less of a victim to the demands around me and more in the driver's seat. But it requires I deal with my fear of man and people pleasing, because otherwise I'll say a lot of yeses to good things at the expense of the most important things.
That's such helpful advice and so incredibly practical. And I would imagine there may be a few people who are pulling over and taking notes or something like that anyways.
Len, I got to say one more thing. I know we got time, but people should be kind to themselves.
That's such a
be
great
kind
point.
to yourself. Like when I was going through a season of grief because of just profound loss in a dear friend's life, everything I just talked about fell apart. I wasn't waking up early to exercise. My time in the Word, like the very things I probably needed the most, fell apart. And you've got to meet yourself in those moments and go, you're grieving, dude. Or you got a lot going on. And it's okay. Like you're loved by God, and you're not trying to earn your way to his approval, and your productivity is not the benchmark of your value. And if we try to scramble our way to productivity to be valued in the world, we'll find ourselves on like a never-ending treadmill. But if we can meet ourselves, not with like the kind of self-love that undermines the gospel, but the kind of kindness to self that flows from a gospel lens, that I'm more broken than I'm probably even aware, more sinful than I'd ever want to admit, but I'm way more loved by God than I can imagine. I'm borrowing the words of Tim Keller, and I'm saying that. From that place, you can meet yourself. And I always try to encourage myself. I'm pretty self-critical. Jade, you got to talk to yourself like you would your dearest friend. Like when my wife Rach feels like the world is overwhelming and the demands of our household are too much, and she's beating herself up for, I don't know, not doing enough of one thing. My response is like, babe, I stinking love you. You're an amazing mom, and I'm so proud of you. And it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
hard to talk to yourself that way.
Yeah.
And I think we
Yeah.
need to meet ourselves there sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Your advice to be kind to yourself, I think, is so important. And I think we've already talked about it, but to recognize the season that you're in. I mean,
Yeah,
I remember a day where it was a victory to get everybody, all three kids and Leanne and me,
totally.
out of the house in the car and get to church on time. Like that
Or even
was
15
just,
minutes late. I stand at the
yeah.
door at church and I see families come in late and I just say, you made it. Well done. And
Yeah.
they're always apologetic. I'm like,
Yes.
no. Guys, trust me. You made it here at 9:10. Well done. I'm so glad you're
Yes.
here. Go
Yeah.
get a coffee. Take your time. You've heard the song before. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I just think that, sure, is being on time for things good, whatever. But the seasons of life make it more
Yeah.
challenging
See,
sometimes.
I just exposed a little of my own brokenness. You've got to be on time. If you're not on time, that's my brokenness, right?
You're just you're an outstanding citizen that wants to be on time. We need some people on time.
Well, we need some people on time, but my father had this saying that he would say, if you're 5 minutes early, you're still 5 minutes late. And so that saying has rung through my brain and life for my entire life. So that's my own brokenness. This isn't about me. This is about you. Hey, want to land the plane here in just a minute, but I do, again, want to just ask you a couple questions about related to the theme of our podcast series this season, which is faith and culture. So we've been talking a lot about faith, how faith interfaces with our lives and your work with the church and pastors and so on. But I think you also have a unique perspective because of your national work with pastors, your local perspective as a local pastor, you have a unique perspective. And so I wanted to ask you, where do you see faith and culture intersecting or even colliding in Canada right now? Like what is the perspective from where you are?
I think we are living in incredible times. Like, I know that the temperature feels hot sometimes in the political discourse, in the public ethical discourse. It can really feel like the culture is becoming more secular in some ways. And that's very true. Like, from an ethical point of view, you can see it showing up in our legislation around whether it's medical assistance in dying or other issues. Like, you can feel a growing kind of secularism. And I think that that's been happening for a long time, but for some people it can be quite disorienting, and that's real. So I think the church has a very important part to play in that part of the conversation. I think that the church is meant to be salt. And one of the ideas of salt in the time of Jesus, when he said, you're the salt of the world, one of the things that would have been on the mind of the listeners is like, oh, salt prevents decay. This is before refrigeration or ice boxes. You pack meat or whatever it might be with salt to prevent decay. And I think that the church is an agent in Canada to prevent decay, to follow the Jesus way, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of others. I can't remember how I know there's this kind of phraseology in the church where it's like, for your glory, God, for the good of others and our joy. And when we follow the Jesus way, whether that's in an ethical way or in our love and hospitality to others, it's for God's glory, not our own. But it is for our joy in him, that it's the path of full life. Like the narrow road, it's narrow, but it leads to life. And it also is for the good of others. And so I think the church has a salty role to play. But I also think we live in such a profound time where there is a renewed, in the midst of like what feels like secularism growing, there is a renewed openness, particularly among the younger generation, for an alternative path. Now, it might be a hunger for Jesus, like a spiritual renewal. And I think that's part of it. But I think it's also a hunger for ancient paths, tried and tested ways of living. I think that there's a growing dissatisfaction, particularly with young people across Canada, of like the promise of secularism, like that check is not being cashed. And I'm looking not for a cooler path or a new and hip way to live. I'm looking for a tried and true dusty path. And so we're seeing across Canada right now a renewed openness. I know that Alpha has their biggest stats of engagement from courses being run and attendance they've ever had before in Canada. A lot of churches are experiencing people showing up saying, I wasn't even invited, but I'm looking to find out about Jesus. Now, that's not to say that there isn't still massive alternative views on some of the issues that we might have referred to, but there's this openness to experience God. I think the Spirit of God's working in a powerful way. And so I think that the church needs to resolve that we exist to be a light on the hill and salt for the glory of God, that we, in a country that doesn't worship God, we'll give him the worship he deserves. Every one of us that gather on Sunday, you go for this hour and a half or however long the service is, this whole city should be worshiping you, but they won't. They won't be. But we will give him glory that he deserves. So to be a worshiping people in the country, regardless of whether the rest of culture values that, but also for us to follow this alternative way of living, the Jesus way. And I think the more that culture doesn't seem to resemble a Jesus-y way, the more it almost can strengthen our own resolve to be like, this is a whole different way of living. But then also to not wait for secular media to give the church a pat on the back for the good work they're doing. I'm telling you, dude, the church in Canada is holding this thing together. You pull every Christian household, every church, every Christian charity out of the cities of Canada, and it's a dark place to live. It's dark, man. The church is holding this thing together. It's beautiful. And I know we've got our issues, and sometimes we turn inward and we become about ourselves and pick the wrong battles. But man, I look at just the city of Vancouver and I see the work of Christians, and it's just stunning work. And there's this insecurity right now that's like, we're not getting credit. We might lose our charitable status, da, da, da. And I think that would be a ridiculous decision for the government to make. And I'm not trying to fearmonger here because maybe that's a long way out, but you hear bubblings of that. But even if that happens, and even if no one gives us a pat on the back, we know that God's placed us here to be agents of another kingdom in breaking into this kingdom for his glory, our joy, and the good of the city. And so I think, man, I think we have a very important role to play in creating an alternative path for people to live. And I think that really relevant to this conversation with focus on the family, when we think about the breakdown of family units, we see social structures, but also even just social skills being a rare commodity, the hyper digital addiction, people with fragmented emotional bandwidths. I think the church has an opportunity to go, we're going to raise communities of love and care and concern for one another. And this will be a totally countercultural gift to the country. So it's like, I'm thinking a lot about like some of the language in scripture. It's like build houses, plant gardens, raise your family, build beautiful homes, build a beautiful life, not an inauthentic life, not a life that's free of challenges, but build a beautiful life and then build beautiful communities and make room at the table for others. And follow the Jesus way, regardless of whether you get a pat on the back or not from the culture around you. But God's using it to hold this thing together and make our communities better places. And ultimately, he'll get all the glory for it. And I don't even know if I've answered your question now. I just gave a little sermonette. Sorry about that.
No, I'm amening you. Well, now I'm doing it out loud, but inside I'm amening you. I'm like, man, that'll preach. I love the picture that you have painted of the work of the gospel in and across this nation. And
it's beautiful, man.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's encouraging. It's inspiring. It's something we should aspire to. I feel like we could just have a whole other podcast on this idea altogether, and maybe we will. But I love what you shared. Our time is wrapping up here. I just want to ask you, any last word that you want to share with our audience? Anything on your heart that you want to share with us today?
I think that any work we do to build deep communities through our household, like when I think about a family, I think about, yes, blood relatives, but I also think about kind of the New Testament vision of family, which is a collection of people within a place gathering at the table together with deep bonds of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any effort we can, like I like to think big, and I like to think, how do we change the country? And I'm so grateful for people who think about policy change, and we should think about that, who think about the national church and think about societal change. But I think that the way that Jesus also does that, or the way that we each participate, is by following the narrow path with our personal lives, and then building deep communities of faith that have room at the table for people like neighbors and stranger and friend. And to just not neglect the importance of that right now. I think that if you fast forward 100 years with all of the crazy change we're going to experience, none of us know fast forward 10 years, and who knows with AI, what kind of world we're living in. But I'll tell you what will preserve the most important things. It will be things that resemble the local church.
Mm-hmm.
Tight bonds of relationships centered around a cause bigger than themselves, Jesus at the center, self-sacrificing love. And I think there's something to be said in this time about building a simple, devoted life to God with a few people around you that I think is going to be a potent counter-cultural force that when we zoom out in a number of years, we'll go, oh, that was actually part of the way that God did a national transforming work, as people gave themselves to raising children, building households, living with consequence, following the ethics of Jesus, building a deep life in Christ. And so maybe it's don't despise the little things, the simple, all we have tomorrow is the day in front of us. And how can we live that day with a little bit of intention, seeking to follow the narrow path in the place he's called us to. And so I think that, I think there's a great reason to have hope in our time. And I've never been more convinced that Jesus is not just the way to everlasting life beyond our death, but he's the way to flourishing life on earth today.
Yeah.
And so if the church can go all in and say, we really want to take serious the Jesus way, be Sermon on the Mount people by the help of the Holy Spirit, I think that that's going to be a great resource to the communities around us.
Jason, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and
My
your
joy.
thoughts with us. Yeah, it's been a rich conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm sure that
thank you.
Everybody listening has as well. So thanks again to you, Jason. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Thriving Family, a podcast from Focus on the Family Canada. If you like this episode, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to subscribe. If you feel led, you can make a donation to focusonthefamily.ca/podcast giving, or find the link in the episode notes. This episode is available ad-free because of the generosity of our donors. Every gift helps the Thriving Family reach more people with hope, support, and encouragement. If you wish to talk about this further, or if it brought up something that you would like to talk through, you can have a free one-time consultation with one of our registered counselors at Focus on the Family Canada over the phone. Give us a call at 1-800-661-9800 to request a consult. It's our gift to you. Most importantly, remember that we are here for you and your family.